if we take a character like James Bond, it's a character that was written by a man, predominantly for men, but within the storyline, he is seen as very attractive to women. How realistic is that level of attraction? And then also, what is it about the character that men look up to, men aspire to? In an evolutionary way, what perspective can we take from that? Is it the tribe leader and we are looking up to him as members of the tribe? What's going on there?
Well, I think that you do well to point out that it's a character written by men for men, and it's it it may not be the most realistic depiction of what women find attractive as a result of that. It's probably a good perception of what men perceive to be attractive. And I'm not saying that James Bond, wouldn't be attractive to women. I'm sure he would be. But in terms of why men find him compelling as a character, he has many cues to, in our ancestry, survival and reproduction relevant traits. So he's very competent, he's very high status, he's very physically dominant, he's very interpersonally dominant, he's very emotionally well regulated, he has access to lots of resources. I think that he's a pretty good archetype. He's a pretty good represent. I mean, again, I haven't watched many of the Bond movies, but he is a pretty good archetype for what a lot of men perceive to be, a
The
successful a
ultimate.
successful man. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I can see why he appeals to many people. Yeah.
You make an interesting distinction there of there's a difference between what men think women like and what women actually like.
Yes.
Talking from a broader perspective now, what are some of those main differences?
I think that one of the main differences that we see is that men seem to overperceive how much women like traits associated with masculinity. So one example of this would be in the muscularity research. So
Right.
women do like muscular men, right? That is a very well supported fact. Insofar as we know anything about women, what women find attractive physically, muscles are right up there with height, right? So I'm not going to say that women like dad bods. That's not accurate. However, what I can say is that if you survey men and survey women and ask them, how muscular would you like your ideal mate to be, and let them pick from an array of bodies, right? And you ask men, how muscular do you think women would like their ideal mate to be? Men will consistently pick a mate men will consistently pick a figure that is more muscular than what women pick. Now, I said that in a very complex way, but to really simplify it, men think that women do like muscles, but men think that women like muscles more than they actually do. Another example of this would be facial hair, right? So we see that, and I'm not sure if this is, systemically represented in males, but a lot of men think like, oh, if I just grew a really big bushy beard, that would just drive women crazy. And it's not that women don't like facial hair, right? If you look at facial hair studies, it's pretty consistent that, heavy stubble is considered very attractive by women compared to clean shaven faces and compared to heavily bearded faces, but it's not a case where you want to look as bearded and lumberjack as possible. Then a third example of this would be in the facial masculinity research, which shows that it really is a bit of a balancing act where you don't want to look too manly and you don't want to look too feminine in terms of your overall facial structure. And this should be pretty intuitive to people. I mean, if you look at the type of characters that men aspire to, right? They tend to be these extremely masculine men. And then when you
Mhm.
look at the type of characters that women admire, male characters and stories and things like that, it's not that they're feminine, right? It's not that they're not masculine, but they're not like the most masculine guy ever. I mean, who have been, the biggest sex symbols and heartthrobs for women over the last decade, right? It's guys
Mhm.
like Timothy Chalamet, Ryan Gosling comes up. I mean, there are some really masculine ones like Jason Momoa, like Henry Cavill, but for the most part, it's guys who are in this moderate level of masculinity. So I would say that in terms of differences between what what men think women want and what women actually want, I would be pretty confident that in general, men overestimate how masculine is ideal.
hmm So we spoke about physical traits there, and I just want to go a bit closer into each one of those, and then we'll move on to some more personality-based traits. With muscularity, what's a good reference point for what women generally perceive to be a good level of muscle? Maybe there's a certain celebrity, a certain BMI, body fat percentage, that the research shows this is what most women actually find most attractive.
Yeah, so there have been some BMI studies, and generally, I mean, this isn't very helpful, but generally those studies indicate that men who are on the higher end of average or even slightly overweight in terms of a BMI scale. So BMI,
Right.
it's just a measure of, weight by height, essentially. It's kilograms per meter squared, right? But it is a measure of size, and we see that men who are on the heavier side are generally, on average, preferred. That doesn't give us that much information though, because we don't know how lean they are, that sort of thing. I would say that as a general rule for a man, I think that as long as you're not taking any exogenous substances to help you in your muscularity journey, you're at very little risk of becoming too muscular, right? Like for the vast majority of men listening, if you hit the gym hard and eat right, but don't do anything further than that, it's very unlikely that you're going to get so muscular that it actually puts people off. And this is something that we see in studies of men of naturally varying muscularity. So men who are not, digitally edited to look super muscular, men who have not, taken androgens to be as big as possible. Women generally prefer the most muscular men in those samples or in that sample. So I think that I don't want to take people the other way and say like, oh, don't try to build muscles because that's completely misleading. What I would say is that if you're on Instagram and you're seeing those like super huge, scary bodybuilders or whatever, and you're thinking, oh my God, how am I supposed to compete with this? You're really not competing with that, right? From a logistical standpoint, there aren't many of those guys around. But also, in general, the average woman won't prefer those physical traits. Now, on the other end, though, if you're listening to this and you're like, hang on, I do take a lot of those substances and I am really big and Macken's telling me that that's going to hurt my chances. That's probably not true either, actually, just because the portion of women who would like a very muscular physique is likely much larger than the portion of men who actually have it. Like that sort of physique is so
Mhm.
rare that you're almost falling into a niche where you have so little competition that it will probably feel like an advantage. Like an example of
Right.
this would probably, like an example of this could be tattoos as well. Like the average woman does not like a man who is completely covered in tattoos, has his neck done, sleeves, da 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 da. That's not going to be the ideal for the average woman, but there are so few of those men around that compared to the amount of people who would find that, to be a provocative and interesting look that those men probably feel like they have cut out an advantage. So
Mm.
this is a bit of a maybe a complex point. Maybe it's a simple point, and I'm overestimating it. But I think it's a little tricky in the sense that you can make yourself less attractive to the average person, but if you're in a certain niche, then you're very attractive to that small group, and it feels like you're more attractive. I'll actually, you know what? Looking at you is giving me an example here. So very few men dress really fancy all the time, right?
hmm
And it may or may not be the case that like maybe the average woman doesn't like super fancy dress, right? Maybe
Sure.
that's true.
We'll
I
use
haven't
that as
seen a
an
study.
example. We'll just use it as an
Yeah,
example. Yeah.
as an example. But if let's say 5% of women just absolutely think it's charming and just think it's incredible, right? Way less than 5% of men are dressing like that. And so you've cut out, a niche that is a niche audience that is bigger than the niche of your competitor.
Right. I'll give you a great
So that's something to
example
keep in
from
mind
my
as well.
yeah, what happened to me in my personal journey was if you'd met me 6 or 8 years ago when I was in my late teens, I was very gothic looking. I had long dark hair. I used to dress entirely in black clothing. I was pasty white. And the exact same thing happened to the majority of women, completely repulsive. However, there is a small subset of women that really like that, and there aren't many men doing that, so you immediately attract them. And I suppose it's the exact same thing with any niche that you carve out for yourself, even if you're let's say you're a hyper feminine man, there are going to be a certain percentage of women who find that very attractive. So really, whatever is authentic to you and what's the way that you want to express yourself the most, there will be people, as long as you're doing a good version of that, there will be women who find that appealing. So far, we've looked at the traits of masculinity physically, and we've identified that for the majority, men overestimate how masculine women actually want them to look. Now, is there a difference in age? Let's say a woman of 18 or 19, on average, will she prefer a slightly more feminine or less masculine man compared to, let's say, a woman of 35?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's I'll quickly make a side note. So I did say that I think men overestimate. I wouldn't say all men do. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the average man actually has his head on straight regarding this and can take a pretty good guess at who's attractive and who's not. Like I haven't like there are some studies indicating that men overperceive, like the muscularity studies I'd reference. I would say this is a general trend, and I would say that I see it very strongly in some individual men. But I wouldn't say that everyone listening is going to have a misperception. A lot of guys do understand this intuitively. Now, as far as age differences go, it's interesting. I mean, there hasn't been a ton of research on this, but we spoke about beards earlier, right? Beards are a very masculine trait. And one thing that we see is that younger women, on average, so you were saying like 18, 19, 20, whatever, very young women, they on average will prefer a clean shaven face. Whereas older women, 31, 32, 33, they'll prefer, a bearded look, right? As women get older. So I would say that, if you're dating in your 20s, then if you're listening, you said that you have an audience ranging from 20s to 40s. If you're a man and you're dating in your 20s, then maybe the clean shaven look has a relative advantage. If you're dating, yeah, exactly. And if you're dating in your 40s, then maybe the beard look will suit you a little bit better for the demographic that you're likely to be dating.
What's funny about both the muscularity and the beard is if a man does have a huge beard or he's extremely jacked, the majority of compliments, even just anecdotally, you see this, will be from other men.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is why I said, like, not everyone has a misperception here. Like, I would
Yeah,
say that most men who have the experience of, building muscle, have noticed that, it definitely is appealing to women, but the majority of interest is from other men. And the same thing with facial hair. I mean, I've definitely seen that where it's like, my buddy will grow out like a crazy beard and all of his mates are like, oh, this is sick. You look great. And then his girlfriend is just begging him to shave it. So, I'm
yeah.
not saying that women don't like beards and women don't like muscles. They do like both of those things. It's just about, extent and degree.
Yeah. Now, on the personality side, or perhaps hobbies and interests, are there any things that a certain subset of men seem to overestimate how much women will like them? Maybe there are some more aggressive personality traits, more hyper masculine personality traits that actually women are on the whole not as turned on by as we might imagine.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think this is me now speaking anecdotally, but I used to be a competitive amateur boxer, right? That
Okay.
was the sport that I did for my, entire teen years. And I always get comments like, "Oh, I bet you did that. I bet you did that just for the girls, right?" Or whatever. Like guys will say stuff like that, like, "Oh, I bet you did that." And I think back and I'm like, I don't think I ever got an ounce of attention for that, right? Like that never like I didn't have any issues dating growing up, but the good experiences I had were never a result of combat sports, right? So I'm not saying and this is something that I think again kind of relates back to the earlier conversation. Obviously, doing combat sports is attractive, but if you go to a UFC fight or a boxing match, it's not like there's crowds of women trying to watch the fighters. But you do see those crowds at a Harry Styles concert, right?
Right.
Where a man is on stage, dressing in a very feminine way and singing love songs, right? So this idea that like, oh, the thing that you need to become, as attractive as possible is to just be maximally socially dominant, maximally aggressive, maximally good at fighting. Not necessarily. I would say that those things certainly help, right? Obviously, being, you know, a formidable individual is going to be attractive, but it's certainly not the main thing. So I would say that you asked about hobbies that men might think would be very attractive but aren't. Um, I think that I would have been better off playing guitar throughout my teenage years than boxing if my only goal was to be attractive.
Right. Well, that's why I played guitar as a teen and didn't box. And now as an adult, it's the other way around, actually, because I'm addressing my own deficiencies in a sense. But it's interesting that I did a video the other day, talking without any scientific basis. So maybe you could fill in the gaps here, where I was talking about the archetype of the artist. It's interesting that you mentioned Harry Styles because I used that example too. What is it about a man who is able to express himself artistically, play music, write poetry, that ends up being incredibly sexually attractive to women?
Well, one thing that you could look at, for example, is the animal kingdom. So we see if you look at any nature documentary, you'll have, you know, David Attenborough commentating, and you'll have some gloriously colorful bird doing this incredibly flamboyant dance and song, and that is what they do to obtain a mate. And there are some researchers, it's not like a super common idea, but there are some researchers that believe that the reason that artistic talent evolved in Homo sapiens was to help men and women, because we're a mutual mate choice species, attract mates. So, you know,
Mm,
the fact that we can sing beautifully, the fact that we can play instruments, the fact that we can make visual art, part of the reason that this capacity may have evolved is in order to attract mates in the first place. It's a signal. It's a signal of your quality as a mate that you can do this incredibly complex, high coordination, high brain power activity, and also perform under, you know, tremendous amounts of pressure. I think that
mm.
there's a reason that, you know, if you look at the and this is true men to women as well. I know that your audience is mostly men, of course, so this is going to be talking past a lot of people. Uh, but let's just acknowledge that if you looked at the top 10 sex symbols for men over the past, you know, 50 years, it's going to be a lot of singers. It's going to be a lot of actresses, right? It's going to be a lot of these kind of artistic types who are able to perform. I'm not saying that that's why that they're attractive, but that's why they're getting so much attention. And it's the same
Right.
kind of thing on the other end as well, where it's like if you know, you take someone like Harry Styles and he's a PhD student like me, right? Well, then he's probably not going to be that attractive. I mean, he's going to be very good looking. Like he's definitely going to be able to get a girlfriend and stuff. He might even get a modeling contract, right? Uh, but he wouldn't get this volume of attention. So it's it's a combination of factors. I would say that what we're looking at for a case like Harry Styles is a combination of, you know, very good looks, very good musical ability, and then also marketing, you know, being a very famous person, getting a lot of eyes on target, so to say. I mean, that's the
Mm.
thing about fame. I mean, I'm sure you've noticed this yourself. I mean, you've gone from I believe you have kind of just arrived, but like immediately gotten, you know, 100,000 followers or whatever.
It was
Um,
quick. It was fairly quick, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so it's like if you have that kind of experience, then you know that like the even if only let's say only 1% of people, I'm not saying that this is the case for you, it's going to be a much higher number, but let's take someone like just a random person. Let's say only 1% of people find an individual attractive, right? If
Hmm.
they're only at their job where there's 20 people, then nobody's even going to like them, right? But if they're
Right.
super famous, well, then that 1% number is being, you know, applied to a much higher population.
Mm.
So oftentimes, you know, and fame itself is also attractive. So I would say that it's certainly not the case that, oh, if I could just sing and play guitar as well as someone like Harry Styles, then I would get as much attention. Obviously, you need to have the fame as well. But in terms of why it's attractive in the first place, I would say that it's similar to the reason it's attractive for a peacock to spread their tails, or
Mm.
for a bird of paradise to sing their song and do their dance.
You make a really interesting point here. Let's use the word hypergamy to describe something like social status or financial success. Is there a point at which the returns start to diminish for how attractive women find you? Let's say you are a man and you're 30 years old and you have a net worth of $5 million. If that net worth increases to 500 million, 100 times increase in net worth, I would imagine that the increase in levels of attraction that women have for you as a result of your net worth are fairly insignificantly higher. Would I be right in suspecting that?
Yeah, so you would be right. So I want to make a quick note up front. So the word hypergamy, it's quite unfortunate. It's an academic term that has been co-opted by different kind of internet subcultures. Kind of I don't even want to reference them, but
I think we
these
all
it
know
could
who you mean. Yeah.
yeah. So there are people who have used this term, and they've sometimes used it correctly and sometimes used it incorrectly. And what that's done is that the term hasn't become super valuable. So let's define it up front. I think it's fine to use it in terms of social status. That's what it was originally applied to. So you're not using it incorrectly. It's this idea of individuals mating up in terms of a given variable. Sometimes it's education. You hear about educational hypergamy quite a bit, and educational hypogamy as well. Then there's also financial and status hypergamy, or hypergeny in this case, because we're talking about women mating up. So I would say that it is true that on average, and I can't speak about it yet, but I've actually just maybe I'll have to come on again in the future, not to invite myself, but we've just done some research on hypergamy, which is very interesting. But I'm not at liberty to speak about it yet. But in terms of you saying that after a certain amount of resources, there might be a diminishing return. I think that's very likely true. And I'll speak from analogy to physical attractiveness, where it seems that a lot of mate preferences may function as thresholds more than more than weighing scales, so to say. So it's like if you're good looking enough for someone, then more good looks past that point probably won't add much to your attractiveness. If you're
Mm.
rich enough for someone, more wealth past that point won't, for the average person, add that much necessarily. So they did this very funny study where they took, very similar to a dating app, they took photos of people's faces, photos of men's faces, and they took biographies describing these men, and they mixed and matched them and showed them to women, right?
Okay.
And what they showed was that personality mattered more than looks if the man was good looking enough, right? So
Okay.
long as the man
Yeah.
wasn't unattractive. So for unattractive men, personality made no difference. He could have the best personality in the sample, the worst personality in the sample. It didn't even matter. Like they were not considered. But once you got men who were, moderately attractive and comparing them to men who were very attractive, women would often choose the moderately attractive over the very attractive man. They would often choose that if the personality was better. So this
Mm.
this can be quite similar with wealth as well. It's like, obviously, if you're making 150 grand a year, you're going to be much more attractive to the average woman than if you're making 30 grand a year, right? But if you're making 150 versus 250, those are both, the very good lifestyles. They're going to be past the bar for a lot of people. Then it might become a question again, even though that's still a very large difference on paper, that then it might become again, and this is speculative, more of a competition of who has those other factors lined up. So I would say that there will be some women who are going to be selecting very heavily for just resources, in the same way that some
Yes.
men select very heavily for just looks, right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, we're looking for a collection of traits, and you don't want to just overly focus on maxing out one. And in the case
Mm.
of wealth, I would actually consider it a risk, in the sense that if you've only worked on your money and you've only got wealth to show for yourself, well, then you're going to attract people into your life who only want you for your money, because that's the only thing that you're offering.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that's missing in a lot of the messaging out there for men currently. It's so, especially for younger men, it's so based around a small set of characteristics, money included, that I feel like we dangerously neglect other important character traits to develop. It's like if you have enough money and you're muscular enough, all women will want you. Well, they might want you for a night or for a date or to buy a bag, but long term, there are so many other characteristics that people are looking for. And I'm
I mean,
curious to get,
oh, sorry
yeah.
to interrupt you. I just
No,
remembered
go
a
ahead.
funny anecdote that I
Yeah.
want to share. I saw a tweet the
Sure.
other day. I'm pretty sure it was bait. But this woman said, I would rather date a gym owner making 300 grand than a tech bro making 1.5 million. And
Yeah.
she said, you know, like she would rather date a guy. Basically, the message of the tweet, I've butchered it, but the message of the tweet was, I'd rather date, you know, a masculine, jacked guy who's making a good amount of money than, you know, a very dorky guy who's making tons and tons of money. Now, I think this
Yeah.
tweet was bait because 300K is still a lot of money, and
Sure.
but the reason the joke is funny is because it's tapping into something true, which is that, you know, human mate preferences, they select on a mix of traits, and once you have enough of one of those traits, having more might not necessarily be the best move. It might be better to work on other things.
And that goes to prove your point as well about people have a certain threshold. Maybe in the case of this, that woman's threshold is, let's say it's 250K.
Yeah.
So to her, the guy making 1.5, she thinks, well, I don't know if I really care about having that extra million a year. When it comes to looks and people's personal threshold for looks, what are some predictors of how high or low that threshold will be for other people?
That's a very good question. I'll give you one, and it's probably the best one to go off. It's how good looking they are. So people
Hmm.
mate very assortatively on looks. You do see mismatched couples, but we all notice them.
Yeah.
Think about that, right? There are mismatched couples, but the fact that we notice them should give us some information about how uncommon they are, right? The fact that they jump out to us.
Yes.
So one thing we see is that good-looking people generally have higher standards for how good-looking their partner should be, right? We see this specifically. I mean, I know that you got a male audience. There was a specific study on this in women where good-looking women really wanted to date good-looking men. And then we also see, you know, a modest correlation between partners in terms of how good-looking they are. So if you're, this is the unfortunate reality of the situation is that if you're maxing out on something like money, it's possible that, you know, you will attract someone very good looking who only wants you for your money. But the more likely scenario is you'll not necessarily end up with someone as good looking. Like ironically, the best way to obtain a better looking partner is to be better looking yourself. And this also carries over to some psychological traits. I mean, people tend to mate quite assortatively, and so eh, across variables. And so a good way to obtain a, you know, more psychologically stable mate is to become more psychologically stable. A good way to obtain a more educated mate is to become more educated. I mean, this is the irony of a lot of the advice of like, oh, women, you know, don't focus on your career, focus on finding a husband, right? You've probably seen that floating around.
Hmm.
Is that we have the research on this, and in general, women who are more educated tends to be more married and less divorced than women who are less educated. And
Hmm.
this may be partially because women like, you know, educated, successful men. And the best way to get around those men and satisfy those mate preferences is to dial up the notch on yourself. So I would say for the looks threshold thing, I mean, I've given I tend to give very long answers. I apologize. But
No,
for the
it's all
looks
good.
threshold thing, I would say that if you want to get past, if you want to, you know, date better looking people, you have to become better looking yourself for the most part.
Hmm. Now, I remember, I have a couple of observations here that I would love to get your perspective on. I used to live in LA, and I had two sets of friends in LA. One group of friends, and these were, I'm talking mostly about women here. One group of women were always trying to meet celebrities, fuck celebrities, ride in their cars. They were playing that kind of game. I don't know whether people want to call it hypergamy, gold digging, whatever. Then I had another set of friends that were completely not in that world. They just worked regular jobs. They weren't interested in meeting celebrities. They would date regular guys. And I noticed that the women who were in the first category weren't really any better looking than the women in the second category. It was more like something in their brain had just decided this is the game I'm going to play and these are the types of men I'm going to go after. Do we know at all why certain women decide, let's just use a cliche example, I'm going to move to Miami and meet a rich husband, whereas some very attractive, very what we would call high value women remain in their hometown and get an office job and meet their husband at a bar?
It's clear that different people have different mate preferences. So people vary in terms of what they want in mates. So that can account for some of it. I would also note that you noted that there wasn't actually that much of a difference between the women who were dating celebrities and the women who were dating, regular Joe Schmoes. You're like, these are kind of all the same women. They're just making different strategic choices. Is that for casual, uncommitted, and short-term mating, men drop their standards pretty precipitously, whereas women do not. And so it is possible that if you're a relatively, this is one of the main differences in experience, and it causes a lot of the tension in the mating market today, this fact that men tend to mate down for short-term encounters, which is that as an average man, you don't have any access to, the most high quality and most attractive and desirable people. But as an average woman, you probably do have access to those individuals as long as it's, no strings attached. And so, some of those individuals will get lucky and will manage to kind of pull off the heist and end up with, an incredibly desirable celebrity boyfriend or whatever, and that's super cool. Good for them, right? That's awesome. But one risk that, like, if you're looking at this from a strategic perspective, which is the only way that when I'm studying these things, it's really the only way that I think through it. If you're looking at these things from a strategic perspective, there's the higher risk strategy and the lower risk strategy, right? So you can stay at home and you can find, a stable guy who will commit to you and be fairly sure that he's going to love you and treat you right and all that stuff. Or you can go for the higher risk strategy and go for a guy who's, famous and very good looking and very wealthy. But there's a chance that he's only, he's taking advantage of you for something short term.
Hmm.
And only it's only taking advantage if, of course, that's not what the woman is after herself. Because there are plenty of women who also just love short term mating, and that's fine. But it's a risky strategy because a lot of women will find themselves in the position where it's like, oh, I'm dating up for these short term encounters, but none of them will commit to me. Right? This is where a lot of the situationship anxiety comes from. It's like, why isn't he ready for a relationship? And they're not necessarily realizing that they're dating out of their league because as a woman, they wouldn't really date below their league for something short term. So this is something that's called a failure of cross-sex mind reading in the literature, is that as a woman, you wouldn't drop your standards completely for a one night stand. And so when you have one, maybe you're thinking, oh, this guy and we're in the same league, not realizing that a lot of men, maybe even most men, do drop their standards for those sorts of activities.
I think so. And I think some men will drop their standards a little bit, and some men will drop their standards a lot.
Completely. Yeah.
Do you feel like, and this is obviously nothing related to your research or any of the institutions that you're involved with, but do you feel like men have somewhat of a moral responsibility not to lower their standards too much and disrupt the dating market and women's expectations of the kind of man they can be with long term?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think that I mean, I don't, so whenever I'm on one of these shows, I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm appearing as a scientist, right?
Sure,
And
yeah.
so I try to stick to what is rather than what should be.
Hmm.
However, I think you could make a decent case based on available evidence that monogamy and pair bonds are good for society.
Hmm.
And things like, rampant casual mating is probably disruptive to
Hmm.
a variety of things that we care about when it comes to social stability.
Hmm.
So this is, I'm prevaricating a little bit, but I would say that I would say that it's certainly not a good thing to do.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine a world where that sort of behavior makes the world a better place. Uh,
Yeah.
so I would say that yeah, it's I actually I can't even I can't I am trying to even think of a way that I could disagree with it, right? And it's not really coming to mind. I think that, you know, consenting adults can do whatever they like. I'm obviously a fan of individual freedom, but I think that ultimately it's probably not. It's probably, if I had to guess, if I had to forecast, it's probably quite socially disruptive
Mm.
for men to mate down dramatically for short-term encounters,
I
and
would
that's purely speculative. But
yeah, I would probably agree with you for the most part. The analogy I would use would be if you, let's say you don't earn enough money that you can own a Ferrari, but then you go on a Ferrari experience and you rent a Ferrari for an hour and you drive it around like they do in Hollywood. After that, driving your other cars might not really fulfill you in quite the same way. You've ruined your enjoyment of your baseline. However, it might inspire you to somehow find a way to be able to afford a Ferrari. And I do think that perhaps for women, and I'm not talking really about sex here, they might see something in a man that would typically be out of their league that they appreciate, and that inspires them. Maybe it's with their personality, maybe it's by working out more. That inspires them to actually be better and increase their own mate value if they
yeah, I
are
mean
that
that's an
personality type.
interesting angle. That's definitely a new angle, and it is interesting because it's kind of the flip side of it. I guess I think that you can improve your mate value, but I think it's a relatively stable trait for most people.
Mm,
So that's one difference between that and wealth. I would say that one thing that you've noted on, which is really interesting, is that I spoke about the anxiety that's caused by this on the women's side,
mhm.
and you spoke about some of the anxiety that's caused by this on the men's side. So there are two social phenomena that I've noticed that seem downstream of the reality that men tends to mate down for short-term and uncommitted sexual encounters. The
Okay.
first of those phenomena is the situationship epidemic,
Yeah.
let's call it, where
Okay.
women are in this very anxious position of like, oh, he won't commit to me. He's not ready for a relationship. And they're very confused, very hurt, very heartbroken because they don't necessarily realize that they're dating someone out of their league who is only dating them because it's uncommitted, right? Like they wouldn't commit to them. So that's one anxiety on the women's side. And then the anxiety on the men's side is unfortunately what you just described, this kind of I'm not a Ferrari experience, right? Where it's like if you drive
Mm.
around a Ferrari for an hour, then when you come back to me and I'm a Camry, you won't be as happy with me anymore, right? That's the anxiety. You've probably heard about the body count discourse among kind
Yep.
of those manosphere types. And you know, there is, from a statistical perspective, a correlation between, you know, having more sexual partners and your likelihood of divorce or being unhappy or being unfaithful in a marriage, right? So it's not nothing. However, I would say that most of that, I'm looking at this kind of as an outsider and as an academic, I would say that a lot of that is reflecting that I'm not a Ferrari anxiety, right? It's not that
Mm.
they're looking at the statistics and thinking, oh, there's a probability here. Because, for example, right, there are also statistics showing that more educated women are less likely to divorce you and more likely to be
Yes.
happy in your marriage. But they're not like, oh, you have to date an educated woman if she doesn't have a bachelor's degree. You know, they're
Yeah.
focusing on. So it's not coming from the statistics; it's coming from an emotional place. And I think that that emotion, what I'm guessing, is that that emotion is competition anxiety. Is
I think
like
so. Yeah.
if yeah, it's like if they at some like if you look at a lot of these individuals in these groups, they're not men who are like naturally attractive to women, right? Some of them have gotten their money and status to a point where maybe they can figure things out, but these aren't men who would have been like very handsome growing up or something like that. And so they feel some anxiety about the fact that like, oh, if she's dated lots of guys before me, some of those guys are going to be more handsome than me. They're going to be taller than me. They're going to be, have nicer bodies than me, da 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 da. And they're worried about that. My guess is that they're worried about that I'm not a Ferrari experience. So those are two really big, think about that. Those are two really big social phenomena right there. One social phenomena is on the women's side, one social phenomenon is on the men's side, and both of them are downstream of this ancient reality, which is that for less committed mating, men are more enthusiastic, and so they're more willing to drop their standards.
I'm experiencing the opposite phenomenon when I've reflected on the women that I've been in a relationship with or the women that I'm dating, and then I find out more about their past. When I find out that a woman's previous partners were, let's say, less attractive, less successful, lower mate value, let's say that, when I find that out, that actually makes me less attracted to the woman. And I believe it's because,
Interesting.
but I think it's because, and I'm so fascinated to know if you've heard this before or if there's any research at all. I think it's because I go, oh, I thought I was in a higher league than those
Yeah.
men. If I'm dating you, I'm surely not. And that makes me feel uncomfortable or let down.
Yeah. That's funny. Thank you for opening up on that because that's very interesting to me as a researcher.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the only real measure of mate value is who you can actually mate with long term,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Who do you actually enter relationships with? And because that's where the rubber meets the road, I mean, we can talk about things like, height and money and da 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 da. But at the end of the day, your league is who you actually interact with. And so it does make some sense that if you're dating a woman, and I'm sure women have this experience as well, like they're dating a man and they find out like, oh, the girl he was with before treated him terribly and was, like a complete loser. They might feel like, wait, what does that say about me? That like he
Yeah.
was in love with her and now he's in love with me. And I think that you're kind of having a version of that experience. That's really interesting. I hadn't heard that before. I wonder, does it ever happen the opposite way, where a guy is, or a woman is dating someone and they find out that, oh, their ex was like someone very high
Mm.
status, someone very successful. I wonder, could that ever, if someone was, profoundly, I'd be too jealous for this. I wouldn't
Hmm.
like that at all. But I wonder if in some cases that could even enhance someone's perception of how attractive the person is. Kind of a mate choice copying phenomena.
I've thought about this, and
The Pete
I think
Davidson
it
effect, let's call it.
right.
where
I
one
think it
where one very attractive woman dates him and then all of them want to date him. Yeah.
I think it depends on your personal the way that you react to jealousy. Like you said, if you feel like that would make you feel threatened, then that wouldn't be appealing. I think personally, I would prefer that to the alternative. I would imagine that what most people feel comfortable with is seeing that their partner has previously been with partners that you would say are a similar level to you. But also, people's mate value can
I'd want to be
change
slightly
over
better,
time. You are slightly better.
at least.
It's also interesting when you look at it from the other way of, let's say you break up with somebody and then you see their new boyfriend or somebody. It's very interesting to see, oh, well, she's dating down. And that makes you feel good, right? I think that's probably universal. You go, oh, good. Whereas if you see
Yeah.
her with a complete stud, you think, ah, shucks, that's why,
Yeah.
maybe I wasn't in that league and maybe that's why it didn't work out. Also
Mm.
depends on who breaks up with who rejects who, all of that, it definitely plays into it. Because if you
Yeah,
break up with
that's
somebody,
interesting, because
yeah,
people
if you,
tend to, you see, oh, sorry, keep talking. Sorry,
no,
it's
no,
just
no,
the
go.
it's just the internet. Keep speaking, keep speaking.
I was going to say, if you reject somebody, you break up with somebody, what you've said there is, I perceive my mate value to be higher than yours, so adios.
Well, yes, that's. Have you read some of the literature on this point, or is this coming from a?
I have read the books, not the studies, and
Okay.
but honestly, most of this is just coming from my own
Yeah,
personal life, and also I just talk a lot about this with friends and honestly people I'm
yeah,
dating. It's very
yeah,
interesting to me. Yeah.
yeah. So that's very accurate. I mean, if you're getting dumped, one of the reasons that's so devastating is that it's a huge mate value recalibration event. And this is part of the reason. why some theorists think that, you know, the way people go through a breakup and then oftentimes they have like this crazy rebound where they want to date like six people, they're going on like a date a day. And it's like,
Yeah.
what function does that serve? That doesn't seem healthy. And what a lot of people think is that that is, a lot of researchers think, is that's essentially a rapid mate value recalibration
Mm.
exercise where it's like, oh my
Yeah.
God, I just got dumped. Am I unattractive? Let me check. I'm gonna go on a date
Yeah.
with this guy, gonna go on a date
Yeah.
with this guy, or if you're a man, you know, I'm gonna go date with this girl, I'm gonna go date with this girl, and I'm gonna see like who actually finds me attractive, who's giving me the same energy, who is out of my league, and then the anxiety can reduce because it's like, okay, I know my league, I'm back to a place of, you know, normal self-esteem, and I can move on. But it's a reaction to this very brief and intense period where it's like, oh my God, am I ugly, right? Am I
Right.
unappealing? Am I an odious person? Why did this person who we were in love or whatever, and now they're dumping me? What information did they discover about me? So that's one of the
Mm.
many reasons why you've hit the nail on the head. One of the many reasons why a breakup is so devastating is because it's this intense hits to mate value.
And I think that if people have been off the dating market, they've been in a relationship for a very long time. Just anecdotally, I've noticed that people will do that exercise of recalibration much quicker and much more
And
intense. If they've been,
that's
yeah,
exactly what you'd predict. That's exactly what
yeah.
you'd predict. If this hypothesis is correct, I mean, I'm very glad you said that. So anyone listening, they can take this as a free study. It hasn't been done, but if this mate value recalibration idea is correct, then you would expect that people who have been in relationships for longer would need that information even more, right? Because like I've been in the same relationship since my early 20s, and I'm now in my late 20s. So if I went through a breakup, I would have very little idea, you know, how, because I'm
Yeah.
a different person now, so I would have very little information. And the same being said for someone who's, you know, been, if someone's in a 20-year marriage and they go through a divorce, they have no idea what their league is, most likely,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. And that can
Some
be a
people
rough
even think that
experience.
some people even think that affairs are sometimes carried out partially as a mate value calibration exercise to see like what can I get. David Buss has written about that. This idea that sometimes someone might have a sexual affair in order to just see what's out there for them, to actually check on their own mate value.
Hmm. And I think that we critique people who do this, even as single people. You know, you're going on all these dates, you shouldn't need that validation. But also, the validation of people wanting to mate with you is so ingrained in us. It's almost impossible to reject that, isn't it? Surely. It's almost impossible to put that to one side and go, I don't need women for validation. I just am going to work on these other areas of my life.
And it's interesting because a lot of times when people do go to other areas of their life for validation, it's things that are proxies for mate value. Like
It's so true.
I know that the stereotype of evolutionary scientists is that we're obsessed with mating, and this is kind of a negative stereotype, right? Because it can seem like kind of a seedy and maybe shallow thing to be talking about all the time. But someone will say something like, "Oh, you know, I don't need women for validation. I'm just gonna focus on myself." And then what
Mm.
do? They focus on lifting weights, you
Yep,
know,
making money.
making money, right? So it's like, okay, so you're focused, so you're taking time to focus on yourself, but the things you're focusing on are the things that make you attractive to women. What a
Yeah.
coincidence, right? So, you know, even things like playing, or like taking up a hobby, like playing guitar, or, you know, taking up a sport, doing some jujitsu, reading more books, all of these things, they're cultivating traits that make you more attractive to mates. And so oftentimes people will gaslight themselves into like, oh, I'm stepping out of this game, I'm above this. When
Mm.
in reality, they're just investing tons of time into raising their own mate value for the next time they step in.
Yes. Although I suppose everything that is, or almost everything that's good for you, will also increase your mate value. Everything that
Yep.
you could use as a positive outlet will increase your mate value. So I suppose it's two sides of the same coin in a sense, and there's no way to pick one without the other, which is a good thing because it's good to increase your mate value whilst also not putting all of your self-worth on it. Now, there's a couple of things that I wanted to share that are a bit more personal, but I don't mind doing this because I always know there's somebody who's in the same boat. I've never been broken up with or dumped. I've had 3 serious relationships and a few shorter ones, and I've always been the one to end it. What does that tell you about mate value and value exchanged within those relationships? Does this mean, Macken, that my standards have been too low?
Well, it's a very interesting thing to hear because women end the majority of relationships. Many women will go through their entire mating careers without ever experiencing, a true breakup,
Wow.
where or being truly dumped. Uh, I would say, I mean, estimates vary, but let's say between 60 and 80% of relationships are ended by the woman in most cases. And this makes
Mm,
perfect sense because women are, a lot of people are like, oh, this says something negative about women. No, it doesn't. They're more selective at every stage of mating. So it makes sense that they'd also be more selective at the breakup stage. It doesn't mean that they're like giving up on the relationship per se. It's just that they're continuing to be the more selective party. And this is true across most mammals. So the idea that it's something wrong specifically with humans, it's like, well, maybe it's something specifically wrong with evolution. However, it is interesting that you say that you've never been broken up with, but you've only ever done the breaking up. I think the first thing that's making me think, I mean, again, this is you can't really apply general rules of evolutionary psychology to individual people. Like, there's not much analysis to be done. That's more of a clinical psychology thing. But since we're having fun and it's a podcast, my first thought that's coming to mind is that it would reflect that you're quite a selective person as to who you want to allocate your time to, and that's
that's true.
unusual in men, right? So a lot of there's a saying. I think it's from the late Helen Fisher, who was a very nice lady. I had spoken to her a couple times, but she said, "Women are looking for Mr. Perfect, men are looking for Mrs. Good Enough."
Mm.
I think that that's generally true, and that's why a lot of men kind of date whoever likes them. But if you're more selective, and it sounds like you are, then that won't apply for you. Maybe you're looking for Mrs. Perfect.
I suppose that also correlates with other areas of my life of being, I wouldn't say I'm a perfectionist, but I'm continually seeking to improve and considering that what I have now doesn't mean I'm unhappy, but it means I see, okay, this is where what I have now, but beyond the horizon, this is not whom I see myself ultimately ending up with. Um, and I especially become cognizant of that of, let's say, a woman is in her mid 20s, late 20s, even early 30s, they are looking for the marriage partner. They are looking for somebody to have children with. And if I know that they are not that woman for me, it feels unethical to keep that going. And
I think you've got your head on
I
straight
can't,
there. Yeah.
I can't play that role of like, yeah, everything's great. We'll just keep this going for a while. Um, Even that's like, it's funny that we were talking about situationships earlier because you just explain. Um, I've been dating somebody for about 2 months now, and this morning we're getting coffee together, and she goes, "So where do you see this going?" And I go, not this conversation. I knew this was coming. And like you said, I'm definitely in the position, and I'll either edit this out or we will have already broken up by the point this is released. But but you su- you summed it up. You summed it up perfectly when you said men will lower their standards for something short term, whereas women won't. And I was thinking to myself, okay, well, she's a great girl. Why don't I want to be in a relationship with her? And I just ultimately realized that this isn't quite what I'm looking for. I would like to feel more levels of attraction, more emotional connection. And that's something interesting that a lot of the science, as far as I'm aware, or the conversations on this topic do miss out is there is this weird thing that happens where people just fall in love with people. And it's not because they're better looking, it's not because they make more money, it's something about their character, their soul, their spirit, whatever you call it, that just makes them fall in love. And I
Yeah.
personally
The
definitely
reason we
have a
focus.
very
Yep.
sorry,
No,
I was going to
continue.
say
Sorry.
personally, I definitely have never experienced that. So it's very hard for me to relate to that feeling.
Interesting.
Mm.
Well, I just spoke to Adam Bode, who is, and maybe you could have him on, who's one of the world's leading experts on romantic love. He's new to the field, but he's publishing quite aggressively. And he would say that romantic love is the result of basically tons of cues to, and you can ask him yourself, so I hope I'm not misquoting him, but uh, tons of cues to mate value, essentially, like the normal
Mm.
things that people find desirable. So looks is going to
Wow.
be part of it, right? And money's going to be parts of it, but personality also plays a role. The internet discourse tends to focus on things like money and looks because they're so immediately tangible, whereas things like character are harder to get a grasp on. But those things really do matter. I mean, I think that all the men listening to this, or most of them, will know that, like, if you're speaking to, if you're at that stage of life where, you're dating different women and you're kind of hoping to find a girlfriend or something similar, those cues to character really do make a huge dent in your brain on those dates, right?
Mm.
Like if she says something that indicates that she's maybe, a dishonest or disloyal person, either in her friendships or her work, you might be thinking, oh, I don't really have a very high opinion of this person, and that makes a huge difference, right? Whereas if she's constantly giving you cues that, she's, incredibly, a high integrity individual, then that's going to push the needle in the other direction. It's just that those things, the reason we don't talk about, we do talk about them in the research quite a bit, but the reason that they don't come up very often in public discourse is because they're so intangible.
Mm. Oh, that makes complete sense. I had a conversation a few weeks ago with somebody, and this kind of touches on that and also what men misinterpret about what they would find attractive in a partner. Very successful lawyer making, around 500,000 a year. And he was talking about when he met his wife, who owns, I won't say what she does, but she owns her own business and it's also very successful. He said, when I met her, the fact that she owned her own business and was successful, I didn't care about that. I wouldn't have cared if she worked in Starbucks. It was just about her character and her personality. And I said to him, well, if she had all of those traits that you love in her character and her personality and her being just as disciplined as you are, probably wouldn't work in Starbucks, right? It sounds harsh, but realistically, that's the case. So, is it the case that men will typically underestimate certain attributes that they would find attractive in a woman? I know that men put a lot of emphasis on looks, fertility cues, etc. But when it comes to their financial status, their career, do men neglect how important that actually could be?
You're really I think you've read more than you let on, because you're really getting you're really getting into an interesting area of the research right now. So this is a 90% male audience. So I have to say something to get you guys. I'm about to say that you misperceive what you want, and so I have to say something to get you guys on board first. So we have a pretty deep research tradition showing that there's a gap between what people say they want and what people actually choose and actually feel satisfied with in practice. And one thing that this research tradition has come up with, these are all the same data sets, is that women tend to underestimate or understate how much they care about looks, right? This is going to be very intuitive to a lot of you. For many of you, you're going to hear this and it's going to be a bit of a relief. Like, I knew that was true, right? I knew that women care more about looks than they say, because women will be like, oh, it doesn't matter. Many women will be like, oh, it doesn't matter what he looks like, as long as he has a good heart or as long as he has a good job or whatever, I'm fine. And
Yeah,
then in practice, though, they want to date a guy who's, at least 5'10" and relatively handsome, let's say. I would say would be for a lot of women, not all, but
yeah.
a lot. On the other side, though, this same research tradition, the same data sets that have shown this, have also shown that men underestimate how much they care about a woman's ambition, a woman's money, a woman's career, a woman's education, right? So as a man, you might feel like, oh, she could work at Starbucks. It wouldn't matter to me. She doesn't even need a job. It's fine, right? I don't care about her degree. That doesn't matter to me at all. A lot of men feel this intuitively, but in practice, it's not like that for them at all. So your
Mm.
friend who you mentioned, who's dating a very successful businesswoman, it's very easy for him to say, oh, I don't care about money. But that's kind of like when a woman is dating a guy who's, 6'2", gorgeous, well dressed, and she's like, oh, I don't care about looks. That had no impact, right?
Yeah.
He could look like a toad and I'd still be dating him. It's like it's very easy for you to say because you've already gotten all those benefits. So I'm not saying that in either case there's deception there. I'm not saying in either case there's lying there.
No.
In both cases, it could be genuine misperception, but men do tend to underestimate how much these things matter in a systemic way. And this is
Hmm.
part of why we see when we look at successful men, they could date, if they really only cared about looks and personality, they could date women who work in these, hourly jobs, uh, and yet they don't. Men with college degrees tend to date women with college degrees. Men with higher education tend to date women with higher education. Men who make lots of money tend to date women who make lots of money, or at least women who come from families that have lots of money.
Mm.
People tend to mate assortatively on these traits when they can.
Right. Unless you do Secret Millionaire and you go around in your Camry
Mm,
with 5 million in the bank and pull up to
yeah.
Starbucks and pick the pretty girl. But then I suppose it wouldn't work out that well because your world and her world, and this is probably why it's actually important as well. If you come from completely different socioeconomic strata, your social circles are wildly different, it's going to be very difficult to make your lives intertwined, right?
Exactly. It's the same thing as like, it's very easy for a very good-looking woman to say, "Oh, I don't care about looks. I'll date down." But if she were to do that, everyone would comment on it, right?
Hmm.
It would be like a socially strange thing.
Mm.
Exactly the same for a very successful man. Like if Jeff Bezos tomorrow, I mean Jeff Bezos, his new wife is also conspicuously someone vaguely in his own age bracket who's been very successful financially herself, right?
Yes.
Um, if he dated like a very good looking person with a regular job, everyone would it would be very conspicuous and strange, right? It would be like, oh,
Yes.
interesting that he did that. Um, so I think that we have these what you're pointing out is kind of the even outside of the relationship itself, there's going to be these social factors around it that encourage people to mate assortatively.
Yeah, and I suppose as well, let's say you're at top of the food chain in your gender. You are in the top 1% most attractive women, top 1% wealthiest men. Well, let's say you have infinite numbers of people virtually coming and wanting to date you. Well, how do you differentiate? You've got 100 beautiful women that you date in 1 year. You go, well, I like going to the opera. Do you? I like playing golf. Do you? And the people that match your lifestyle, you have to start to figure out how to filter them out somehow. Otherwise, you would just date all of them, and that
Yeah,
would be
there's going to be a huge
impossible.
cultural mismatch. Yeah,
Yeah.
and those things really do matter.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned the body count thing earlier, and we both know just how much is made of that. Y- And you were talking about how there is a certain point at which a very high body count could indicate likely to be likely to cheat, likely to have infidelity in the marriage. You also mentioned how more educated women are less likely to initiate divorce. Are there any other factors that, if a man were looking at this from a very statistical point of view, he should look for in a potential partner that will increase the chances and likelihood of a successful marriage?
Well, I mean, it's tough for me to give out this information just because I know that I wouldn't necessarily advise dating this way. I would say that it's much better to fall in love with somebody and kind of I mean, millions of years of evolution. This is the kind of you get the shallow level evolutionary psychology knowledge where you're like, oh, these are the things that matter in a partner, these are the statistical correlates, and you kind of paint by numbers. But then you get the deeper level understanding of it and you end up kind of back where you started. It's almost like the midwit meme that sometimes gets passed around where there's like
Okay.
the low knowledge and high knowledge converge in the sense that
Yeah.
millions of years of evolution has forged your brain to select good mates for you. And so if you
Right.
have a strong feeling about someone, it might actually your intuitions are forged by evolution to be relatively good. And so even if there are a few, statistical red flags, that's not necessarily something to step out on. However,
But the
If we
cold-hearted
if
bastards, yeah.
Yes, exactly. If you want just one more, I mean, yes, if someone is, so you talked about body count, I would say, just being socially, sexually unrestricted. The difference in long-term mating success between someone who likes having tons of one-night stands and someone who goes from relationship to relationship. I think it's obvious that the relationship-oriented person is going to be better at relationships. So that's kind of a more nuanced version of the body count discourse. Um, you talk about education. Yes, obviously more educated people for a variety of reasons are less likely to be divorced and more likely to be married. Another one is family history. Now, this one can sound quite unfair, but from both a nature and nurture perspective, you would predict that if someone grew up in a household where their parents were constantly fighting and ultimately got divorced and constantly cheating on each other or whatever, versus someone who grew up in a very loving, stable household where the parents really got along well, which of those children is going to be more likely to have a happy marriage, right? I think it's pretty obvious. It's going to be the
Right.
one who comes from the stable household. Part of this is going to be nurture, but also part of it, unfortunately, seems to be nature. I mean, we've done, not we as in me, but researchers have done twin studies looking at the heritability of divorce, and divorce is partially genetic. Now that can
Wow.
sound insane, right? That can sound like a completely like how could it be like divorce is something that happens to you? How could it possibly be the case? I'd recommend reading some of Plomin's work on this topic if you find it interesting. But just to open your mind to it, I think we'd all, for example, agree that to a certain extent, let's say, um, risk-taking propensity is heritable or
Mm-hmm. Yep.
narcissism is heritable, right? So,
Yep.
or maybe sex drive is heritable, right? All these little traits that could impact how happy or unhappy your marriage is, all of those little traits are genetic. And so those tiny genetic contributions can add up to something that has a real effect. And so if someone comes from a household where their parents have an incredibly cantankerous marriage, well, the odds that they have one of those marriages themselves are higher, both because that's what they learned, that's what they watched as a model for relationships, and also because they are literally their parents. They are literally the combination of their parents' genes. So I would say that if you're looking for statistical red flags, let's put a positive spin on it. Let's say statistical green flag.
Sure. Yeah.
If you meet the parents and everything's, hunky dory, everyone's super happy, getting along, things are going great, I would say that's a very good sign.
Mm. So I asked you really for men looking at women, and we have body count, education, and family history.
Same other way
It
around.
seems
Yeah.
right. Are there
Yeah.
any others that perhaps apply to men only? If a man is thinking about his own future and his own marriage, he wants to have a very stable marriage. Beyond all of the character building attributes, are there any things that actually statistically lower the likelihood that he will get divorced? For example, somebody told me a statistic, and maybe this is complete BS, but let me know, that for men who earn over $200,000 a year, the divorce rate is something like 7%. The divorce rate is wildly lower than men who earn less money. And we can both imagine why that might be. Now, feel free to tell me if that sounds completely untrue or if it sounds reasonably accurate. And if there's any other factor statistically that men can do that will lower the divorce likelihood.
It's hard to, so I would say that all the things that I listed in the context of women, they all do apply for men. The one that's
Yeah,
interesting to note there, I think we all would find it very intuitive on the education and family history one.
yeah,
It's interesting. Online, you see a lot of people cite the body count research as if it was only done on women, but it was done on men too. Like those samples have men and women in them, and the effect is the same size on both men and women, right?
right.
There's no difference there.
Yeah,
And this is part of why, women aren't as sensitive to it. But if you do studies and ask women, like, how many past partners would you ideally want a man to have, they usually say a pretty low number, right?
yeah,
And you'll sometimes hear women, if you're friends with a lot of women, get put off about, oh, well, he's a bit of a playboy, da da da
yeah,
da, like thinking it's a little gross, or maybe it's a red flag, like why is he got so many girls in his phone, that kind of thing.
yeah.
In terms of lowering the divorce probability, I'm not surprised. I didn't know that statistic, but it doesn't sound wrong to me. that very rich men have a low probability of divorce. But it's hard to paint by numbers here because it's like I would want to see a study of lottery winners almost, if that makes sense, and
Yeah,
their
no,
divorce
I
probability. Because
completely know what you mean.
I don't think it's the money. I think it's the personality traits that got them the money, if I had to
Right.
guess. And that's just an educated
Yeah.
guess. But it's like if you're a super hardworking, disciplined, committed man to the point where you can make over $200,000 a year, right? You're probably going to bring those traits into your marriage as well. You're also probably going to be disciplined, faithful, like just an all around, better guy for sticking to things than someone who makes 30 grand a year. And obviously there's going to be plenty. I mean, we talked a little bit about uh, working an hourly job, those sorts of things. Obviously, there are personality traits distributed across the spectrum. You're going to find some people who have no money, who have incredibly good discipline. They just don't necessarily value making money as a task, right? But I would say for the most part, it is true that things like education, things like the ability to accumulate resources, they're measurable cues to someone's personality to some extent. And so it's not
Yeah.
surprising to me that they would do well in marriages.
I also think that there's an element of you're able to reduce stressful events in your family life that might rock your marriage. For example, somebody has a serious illness, you can afford it. You can send your kids to the best schools. You can live in an area where your wife isn't going to get assaulted if she steps out the front door. So there's probably two sides to that. Before we wrap up, I do have an interesting question that doesn't really fit in with where we are right now in the conversation, but I've kind of observed that typically people will be attracted to, and couples will look fairly similar to each other, but not too similar, right? It's very rare you see a couple where they look like they could be brother and sister, but let's say you're blonde and you have blue eyes. A lot of those people will be with a partner that has blonde hair, blue eyes. They won't necessarily be with somebody with dark skin, Indian person, etc. Same as height as well. We tend to see taller people with taller people, shorter people with shorter people. What is that sweet spot of looks just about enough like me, and maybe there's a genetic match element going on there, versus looks so much like me that this could be an inbreeding situation?
Interesting. I mean, you would expect there to be some incest avoidance, right? That would be my
Right.
first.
Yeah.
That would be the first thought. Then you see, and I don't know, maybe I have some personal bias here, but you see that people who like that generally there was one study that showed that actually mixed ethnicity children were children with multiple ethnic backgrounds grew up to be better looking.
Really?
And that yeah, and
Interesting.
that may be because yeah, and it makes some sense. It may be because of heterozygosity, where there's just more genetic diversity, which tends to lead to more health. It makes a little bit of sense, and it's also very intuitive. Like there's kind of the folk stereotype that mixed race people are good looking. However, people do tend to mate with people who are of similar backgrounds, and to some extent, people of similar cultural backgrounds do tend to share appearance.
Mm.
So I'm not sure if there's an evolutionary story to tell here. It could be that they tend to go to the same schools and things, but it's interesting because it's not that I've noticed that, but I'm fairly sure I heard of a study where people found that couples tend to look similar, and I think it could be if that finding is true. I'm gonna look it up after this interview. It could be the case that they're doing similar things, if that makes sense, where
Mm.
they have similar, like not only are they from similar backgrounds, but they maybe have similar fashion choices, and that
Hmm.
adds to the similarity appearance. Like it's pretty rare you would see, I mean, you said that you used to have quite a gothic appearance. I'll take your
Yes.
word for it. But it was rare that you would see someone who looks like you with a goth girlfriend, right?
Yeah.
So there's
Right.
stylistic differences. There could also be subtle things like, if you're a really outdoorsy person, you're going to be slightly more tan, that sort of thing. So I
Mm.
would say that if it is the case that couples tend to look similar, it's going to be because they're selecting people who are in their environment and who do similar activities. And if you're in the same environment and do similar activities, you're probably looking more like each other more than chance. However, you're making an interesting point on the inbreeding thing. You know, a priori, like completely before looking at any data, you would kind of expect that people would be nervous to mate with people who look similar to themselves
Yeah.
because there might be some kind of incest issue. But we don't seem to see that. We don't see
Hmm.
some like any, or not that I'm aware of. I'm going to look into it. You've this again. It's not my area. This last question, you throw me a bit of a
Yeah.
curveball, but it's you've made me think a little bit. So I'm thinking aloud. I'm rambling. I'll cut myself off.
All good. Macken, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Where can people go to find you and learn a bit more about the work that you do?
Well, my main outlet historically has been TikTok. I understand that there's a bit of an issue there where they're looking to ban it briefly, and then they might be looking to ban it again. I would follow me on TikTok if you have TikTok. Follow me on Instagram if you have Instagram. I mostly do short videos, so I don't have that many followers on YouTube since I only post shorts. Mm, but yeah, I would say those are good places to start. If you search my name and give me a follow, I'd really appreciate it. And Gen Z, thank you for having me on. This was
My
a really
pleasure.
cool conversation and really interesting questions, and I enjoyed it. Thanks for
Thank
being
you.
so gracious as having me on. And I apologize for being underdressed.
Oh,
How
all
embarrassing.
good. All good.
If
As I
I had
said, you're
known, I would have.
as I said, you're like the Bond villain to my Bond
Yes,
outfit.
and
Just
you're
quickly,
James Bond. Yeah.
just quickly before you go, as you can tell, I'm a bit of an armchair psychologist or evolutionary psychologist. To people who actually want to learn a bit more about this seriously, could you recommend two or three books that you think are accessible and really clever?
Yep. Yep. I'll just recommend one to get you started. Look
Okay.
at When Men Behave Badly by David
Oh,
Buss. That
okay.
book, I probably read it in like I even as someone who had just done a degree loosely in the field, I probably read that book in like a day and a half, could not put it
Wow.
down. I just thought it was so interesting. It's a bit macabre. It's talking about kind of the darker sides of evolutionary
Hmm.
psychology. So it's talking about things like stalking and infidelity, and domestic violence. So it's really, really like into the stuff that doesn't make it onto podcasts. But it's
Mm.
written by the most cited evolutionary psychologist in history, David Buss. So
David
it's
Buss,
written
yeah.
by like the guy on the topic. It's not written by some schmo like me who's, a PhD student and just makes some videos. It's written by someone even people in the field would agree is the man.
Mm.
So if you wanna get a quick crash course on these topics, that's one of the more interesting ones you can pick up.